Hello everyone and welcome to my first official video of 2025. You may have seen I've been putting out a podcast with Topher Field, but this channel is going to be all centered around photography, personal branding, and of course my master's thesis, which is on beauty standards, AI, and self-esteem. But today I really wanted to hit the ground running talking about the Donald Trump and Melania Trump presidential portraits. These two portraits dominated the media cycle for about 2 weeks, and as photographers, I think it's really important that we look when something like this is trending in photography and have a look at why the decisions were made, the creative direction behind it, and how we can either take notice of this in our own workflow, or maybe we can be inspired or at least have a look at the art direction and why these choices were made and how it's been so impactful across the world. Firstly, I've got to apologize. It is 40 degrees outside and my air conditioning in the studio has broken, so it is very hot, but I'm committed to getting this video done today. So if you are interested in breaking down these portraits, it's going to be all about photography. This is not a political video. I'm not going to be talking about Trump's policies. I just want to break down the importance of these presidential portraits. In this video, I'm going to break down the techniques, the lighting, the symbolism behind these images, and why they are going to be some of the most talked about photos in modern history. It's really difficult to overstate the importance of political images like Trump's. A picture can make or break a political campaign, and particularly with the 12 months leading up to his presidency, Donald Trump had a lot of viral photo moments. Most infamously is, of course, his mugshot, and then the assassination attempt photo where he got up and said, "Fight, fight, fight." Those images had dominated the news cycle when they came out, and it's no difference with this presidential portrait. There is a wealth of insight in this for photographers because a lot of people are saying how AI is going to replace photography. Photography isn't as important these days, and when you see a portrait like this come out and dominate the news cycle, it kind of dispels those myths. So let's have a quick overview. Firstly, Trump's picture is bold, it's dramatic, and it's confrontational. It's a real stark departure from his previous portrait in 2016. And then you got Melania's portrait, which is timeless, elegant, it's obviously monochrome. It's very carefully curated. It's a modern take on First Lady imagery. And then look, as I said, regardless of politics, these images reflect current trends in photography and branding, and that makes them really crucial for us as photographers to study. So why do these portraits matter? I've kind of stated this already, but every presidential portrait is designed to send a message. Compare Trump and Melania's to the previous presidents, like Obama or even JFK. These guys have come out with a very clear, decisive expression in their portraits. They mean business. Viral photography like this, they explode across the news cycles, they're discussed, people who are on their side or people who are against them are going to sit there and dissect it and throw all of their own spin on it. Once again, pointing out how important photography is. And that kind of relevance has really been making me lean into focusing on portraiture again. I think it's really important to get back down to basics with classic portraiture because it is so important in documenting people. There's been a massive shift in style here as well, and the two of them don't match. Trump's is obviously bold, it's minimal, it's confrontational, whereas Melania's is much more high fashion. Let's begin with Trump's portrait. This was no accident. The choices here were made to elicit a reaction from all of those who looked at it, and it will be discussed in the history books for decades and even centuries to come. There is no precedent in US presidential portraiture for the piercing intensity of Trump's expression. His gaze has broken through the traditional drudgery. When we have a look at previous portraits from presidents, they all kind of follow the same script. The lighting's quite similar, they're well lit, they're very commercially lit, they're obviously in a very regal room where you've got all the paraphernalia from the president's office, you've got the American flag, all that really important symbolism, but mostly they're just a corporate headshot. Whereas you look at the current photo of Donald Trump, that is a very deliberate choice. Daniel Turok, the chief White House photographer who took the photo of President Trump, went on Phonos Photos and broke down the recipe for the photo. It was taken on a Nikon Z9 with an 85mm f1.2 lens, and it was shot somewhere between f5.6 and f6.3. The lighting setup consisted of a Profoto D30 at the front, two B10Xs over the shoulder and as under eyeliners, and an A2 as a hair light. And Turok said that ultimately it was the president who made the final call with the photo that was selected, but the inspiration from the image of Trump was taken from his now infamous 2023 mugshot. Now I'm going to go out and say, as a portrait photographer myself, I'm not a big fan of the lighting. I actually find this a little bit old school, a little bit dated, but I do understand the choices behind it. Let's firstly break down the direct and confrontational gaze. Again, this is referencing his 2023 mugshot. It's deliberate. It evokes a sense of power and defiance. And I like to think that if fuck around, find out was an image, this would be it. It's giving retribution, and this time I mean business. Trump has come back to prove a point. Of course, you've got the American flag in the background, but because it's a very tight crop, you can only see a little bit of the stripes. This is intentional. It's again leading your face into the frame. And thanks to that compression from the 85mm lens, Trump is nicely isolated from the backdrop to ensure all focus is on him. There is no distraction in this portrait. Now, let's break down the lighting. In a contemporary world, many of us overlook the influence from artists past, seemingly forgetting those who paved the way for us. I think it's important to look to the historical masters and see how they may have influenced the way we see things. I'm obsessed with light. I love understanding it, I love harnessing it, and I love manipulating it. Even though the lighting in this portrait isn't for me, I can appreciate the very deliberate creative direction here, as lighting truly is everything. This portrait uses the chiaroscuro technique, a technique from the Italian Renaissance and Baroque periods, widely used by artists like Caravaggio or Rembrandt. This creates a really dramatic contrast between light and shadow. The term itself combines the Italian words for light, chiaro, and dark, scuro. And if you're Italian, please forgive my terrible pronunciation. In photography, chiaroscuro involves carefully directing lighting to sculpt the subject's features, drawing attention to key elements while shrouding others in shadow. So what's happening here? We've got a single strong key light from the front focused on Donald Trump's face, creating shadows around the side of his face that really emphasizes his imposing gaze. The harsh lighting suggests overexposure, or perhaps the light source has been put quite close to his face, making the look more intense. The background is quite dark in comparison, making Trump's face the sole focus. This isn't my taste, as I've said. I'm not a fan of hair lights, as it makes the image look quite artificial or unnatural. This is a very old school way to light a portrait. There are ways of separating the subject from the backdrop, and this is achieved by backlighting, but it doesn't need to always look like this. Now let's have a look at the post-production and the editing. There's been a lot of high contrast adjustments made here to really enhance that depth. With such strong lighting that we've got here, I think they've really balanced out the highlights and the shadows quite well, and I think they've adjusted the saturation. Given this is a presidential portrait, it would make sense that the blue and the red hues have been up just a little bit to make it a little bit more punchy. And if we have a look around the side of the frame, it looks like some gradient masks may have been added in, or perhaps even a vignette to really darken off those edges. And you can see that there because the little pin on his lapel, it doesn't quite match the lighting. I would say that's been adjusted in post because it's obviously quite an important symbol to be featured in the portrait. But all in all, I would say this portrait is a very staunch contrast to his portrait from 2016. Now let's have a look at Melania Trump's portrait, which is much more my taste. When this came out, I thought it was absolutely impeccable. I do have a couple of criticisms, and they're only small, but this is the kind of photo I would like to see of a First Lady. I think it's incredibly flattering, she looks well presented, and I think the photographer here did a sensational job. This image was captured by Belgian-born, Paris-based fashion photographer, again, please forgive my pronunciation, Regine Mahau. I never quite know how to pronounce a word that has an X on the end of it. But anyway, she's a French photographer who's been taking photos of the Trump family for almost 20 years. So it's evident that Melania is very at home with this photographer. So let's have a look at the key points here. Her pose with her fingertips placed firmly on a remarkably reflective table seemed to communicate a readiness or a let's get down to business kind of stance, which suggests to me that she might be taking a much more active role in this presidency. She is smiling, there is a softness to her expression, but there's no teeth visible. So there is a softness, but it's conveying a sense of authority and control, which I guess is what you would want from the president's wife. There's no jewelry to be seen here, and I thought that's worth pointing out because even though she's wearing a tuxedo with a tailored Dolce & Gabbana blazer and a Ralph Lauren cummerbund, she looks sophisticated, but it's not an overt display of wealth. And obviously we know they're very wealthy people, but it doesn't seem to suggest here opulence. There's no sort of regalness, there's no like flaunting of their wealth. She's immaculately dressed, she's well presented, but it doesn't look like she's trying to separate herself too much from the American person. The first thing, of course, we notice is that it's monochrome, and black and white makes the image feel timeless and removes any distraction. It really forces the viewer to focus on the shape, the form, and the contrast instead of any color. The black and white choice is designed to communicate a seriousness of her position. Now let's break down the posing and the composition because it's really strong in this portrait. She's poised yet assertive. She's got her hands resting on that reflective table, which creates depth in the scene. You've got the Washington Monument in the background, which subtly connects her to the history and the legacy of the president's office. And then you've got those strong vertical lines coming from the window, which really reinforces elegance and structure. It's using that rule of thirds, but if I have to be really picky, I can't stand that she's not perfectly centered between those lines. Now let's have a look at the lighting. The lighting is soft and directional, but it's really diffused, which is very different to what Donald Trump went for in his portrait. It looks to me like a large octobox has been used, and I can tell that by the catch light in her eye, which is nice and round. That really big octobox, perhaps maybe 150 centimeters, is going to allow for that nice even lighting, and you can see it feathering off over her shoulders. I think that really helps it look like a much more feminine photo. It's very flattering, but it's still giving you that nice contrast between the light and the dark. That gentle fall off keeps the image refined and classic, and it looks as though there's potentially a second light to the right, or perhaps a white polyboard giving you that extra bit of fill in her face. And on the other side of her face, you've got that nice contrast and shadow that may have been achieved by a black polyboard, or perhaps it's just where the light's naturally tapered off. Now let's break down the camera settings and the equipment used in the photo. Having a look through Regine's work, it seems that she uses Canon cameras, so perhaps this is a Canon R5 or even a late DSLR like the 5D Mark IV. She hasn't broken down what particular equipment she's used in the frame, so I'm just guessing. I would suggest this is probably an 85mm or 100mm prime lens though. We can see that by the compression in the frame. But remember again, the Washington Monument is considerably in the background from that window. So we're gonna get that natural separation anyway, just because of the distance between the objects. So why does this matter to photographers today? Well, photography is storytelling, and whether it's a president, a model, or a bride, every portrait is designed to evoke emotion and shape perception. Trends really matter. These portraits reflect the current state of portrait photography, dramatic lighting, bold storytelling, and really clean composition. And we've got to study these portraits. Whether or not you like the subjects in them, that's irrelevant. What you're looking at is masters at work, and these are the photos that have been chosen by key influential people across the world. Regardless of politics, these portraits are some of the most powerful and talked about images in modern history. And as photographers, we have to ask, what makes them work, and how can we apply these lessons in our own work? And again, like I said, Donald Trump's portrait isn't my taste, but Melania's I think is immaculate. And I've definitely learned something from these two photos. So that is my breakdown of Donald Trump and Melania Trump's portraits. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know in the comments what iconic photos you'd like me to break down next. Be sure to like, subscribe, and do all the things on YouTube here because I will be doing weekly videos breaking down photography, talking about personal brand, and all things beauty standards and AI. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I'm not gonna lie, I am dripping with sweat. This has been intense.